The last star has fallen!
The game has been rigged, forget all the rules. Stop believing what you're told. All this hate that I feel for you, my one true enemy. Once was blind, but now I see. It makes me question why.
You know, you guys really gotta stop telling me that, like, games are the best in their series, and I'm definitely gonna like them better than the other games in the series, because I just feel like you give me these exceeding expectations, and I just don't know why I listen to anybody. Because what happened with Star Force 2 is I went in with really low expectations of the game, but it turned out to be not that bad. I mean, it had some flaws, yeah, and there were things about it that I didn't like, but for the most part, I really liked it. Like, you know, but everyone kept saying that Star Force 3 is easily the best game in the series. So naturally going in, I'm like, alright, this should be really good. And I gotta be honest with you, not super crazy about certain elements of the game. Certain elements. I'm not saying it's a bad game, though. Mega Man Star Force 3 is a mixed bag for me personally, and it's mostly down to how it starts. I think it's one of those slow burn RPGs where, yeah, in the beginning, there's so much going on that's just terrible that I can't ignore it, but the more I played, the better it got. And by halfway through it, yeah, the game was getting really good. But this is back to, like, Final Fantasy 13 logic, where it's like, yeah, after 20 hours or so, the game gets really good. But I want the game to be good, like, right now. And in the beginning, the game is not very good at all. But let's talk about positive points first, because I still think it's a good game. I do think it's a good game. I think it's a perfectly serviceable entry in the series, and it has some great ideas, particularly from the overall gameplay mechanics perspective, as well as moving around in the game. You see, one of the biggest problems with both the first two games was the level of wandering and the random encounters and the ridiculous stopgaps that they put in to pad the game out, seemingly to waste your time. Star Force 3 doesn't do that nearly as bluntly, nor is there a tremendous amount of random encounters. In fact, the random encounters have been dropped to almost negligible amounts. I've never seen a random encounter ratio so low in an RPG, actually. It's pretty clear the devs took that complaint to heart early on and made sure that Star Force 3 had a lot more actually exploring and less running into enemies all the time. I mean, you do, but it's not overbearing like it was in the first two games. Additionally, you no longer have to go to specific points to turn into Mega Man anymore. Geostellar can now do that whenever he wants. You still have to get to certain points to get on the EM Wave Road, but that's no different than 2, and at least this way, if there's something you have to deal with as Mega Man on, like, the ground, you don't need to run away from it and find a weird specific point to turn into Mega Man. You can just do it right there. So that's a lot better, and I think the actual combat has been streamlined to the point it's pretty much perfect. The responsiveness, the overall crisp design, the updated visuals of the game, everything is smooth as butter. It was already good in the first two games, but they clearly ironed out the limited jankiness that did exist and made it extremely satisfying. It's fun. Music is, of course, top-notch, and they also made it so that all the action is going on the top screen this time. See, in the other games, it would always switch back and forth which screen was relative. Basically, the top screen was used exclusively for battling, and then all, like, the settings menus and the pause screen and stuff like that, and the bottom screen would be used for running around. In this game, the top screen's used for pretty much everything except for the status screen, which now utilizes a new Hunter VG type setup, and on that screen, there's pop-ups that show up that allow you to do certain specific weird abilities whenever the game needs you to. It's not really that deep, but they do make use of the touchscreen for it, and I appreciate the top screen being reserved for pretty much everything you'll need to look at all the time, especially from an editing perspective, because do you have any idea how annoying it was to constantly switch back and forth which screen I had to show for the review when I was editing the last two games? It was a pain. This game doesn't do that to me, so that's bonus points just from a reviewing perspective. But with all this, it sounds a lot better, and yeah, from a mechanics perspective, from an exploration perspective, from all things that involve the major core game mechanics, 3 is by far the superior title. But 3's issue is that it had a lot of nagging problems when it comes to pacing. Now the plot of 3 is actually pretty good, centering around this new phenomenon called noise, which basically makes all the new wizards go crazy. Wizards are basically Navis from Battle Network, except they're EM beings, and they can exist in the physical world too. Omega Exis has actually been slightly altered to be a wizard in this game, and in that way he's allowed to actually interact with things in the real world without giving away that Geo is necessarily weird and has like an alien in his electronic device, because now he can just tell people that this is his wizard, and everyone believes him. No one calls attention to the fact that Omega Exis looks nothing like anyone else's wizard. But, then again, wizards are extremely customizable, and there are many different kinds of wizards in the new universe, so, you know, them believing that Omega is in fact just a wizard and not actually an alien is totally understandable. But in the first place, the way they go about explaining this is the most brutally mundane, blunt force explanation I've ever seen in any RPG. No less than, I think, 3 times. Omega, or somebody else, says, "Due to advances in EM technology, this is now a thing." This is literally the first set of mandatory dialogue in the game, and it goes on for like a half a friggin' hour, where they basically just say, "This is why this is happening. This is why this is happening. It all happened off screen after the events of the second game, and we're just updating each other on things we should already know." Obviously, this is put in place so the player doesn't necessarily get confused as to why that is now happening, but I feel like there was a much better way to do this kind of exposition without just straight up explaining it to the player through ridiculous rudimentary dialogue in the game. It doesn't make any sense for the characters to talk to each other like this, and it goes on and on and on about how, because of all these advances, wizards are now a thing, and at one point Omega actually calls Geo his operator. So basically they just reverted everything to the way Battle Network did it. It's just that the Navis, in this game, wizards, are able to exist in the real world all the time due to, you know, matter wave technology. But, you know, that kind of took away the uniqueness of Star Force, I feel, in the fact that now, you know, Geo is an operator, just like Lan, and I guess it's still kind of different because Geo merges with Omega Exis to become Mega Man, but Omega can do things on his own too now. It's just strange that they would go that far back to the way Battle Network did things, rather than let Star Force continue to feel at least a little bit unique. But even outside of that, the actual plot is absurd in the first place. It takes forever to get to the actual true villains of the game. 2 didn't do this, and many people complain about 2's plot for feeling disconnected, and I get that, but 2 at least got straight to the action. But in this game, yeah, the villains attack, but the main cast has no idea who they are, and even the main ones are still kind of in the background for roughly, I don't know, 10 hours? And often what's going on is so rock stupid. Like, unspeakably stupid in such an extreme way. And I understand, I recognize that this kind of RPG is kind of meant for kids in a way, like Mega Man's supposed to appeal to all ages, but it's so dumb that I can't ignore the level of just sheer what is going on here. Actually, let's jump back from the villains just for a second. Why does Geo still hang out with Luna? She's just the worst most of the time. And literally, the very first thing she basically tells him is, why didn't he show up as Mega Man? Because, and I quote, she doesn't like Geo and she doesn't like Omega Exis. She only likes them when they're combined. Geo is worthless to her, as a friend apparently, by her own admission. This is actual dialogue that is actually spoken by this girl. I gotta be honest with you, if a friend, a quote-unquote friend, ever told me that they don't really like me, they just like, I don't know, my online persona or something like that. Like, obviously I'm not a secret superhero or something, but my point is, if my friend told me something like what Luna said to Geo here, I promise you, I would not be their friend anymore. It's especially heinous. It's a horrible thing to say to somebody. And this is like the first thing she says. And Geo's like, yeah, whatever. Like, he just takes it. At least Omega doesn't mess around and actually chases her around the room, which I do give to Geo on this point. He lets it go on a lot longer than he had to, purely out of spite. And Geo, admittedly, does show that he's growing as a person and starting to stand up for himself and take the hero role a lot more seriously. He's come very far from the shy kid from the very first game who really did not want to be a hero at all. Now he's always ready to save the day, and that's pretty solid character development for him. Some of the other characters do have some better development. It's just Luna, who I'm like, could you shut up for like 2 seconds? You are not the center of the friggin' universe. Some of you anime fans may say that she has solid tsundere energy. I don't agree. I think she just has solid the worst energy. Even a tsundere doesn't say something that horrible to somebody. Yeah, they can be kind of mean, but this is just a nasty, heartless thing to say. The brother bands are of course still here, as are the link points, which is troublesome. The link points, as you know, are a horrific dystopian nightmare where people are literally graded based on how popular they are and have certain perks if they're more popular. It's literally an arbitrary number that decides how much you are worth to the world. It's actually legitimately terrifying. And 3, yes, does have them involved, though I will give it this, there's less restrictions on having a lower LP. It only refers to how many upgrades you can give to Omega, but it still does set a really bad precedent, and it makes it abundantly clear that some people are definitely worth less than others. There's this guy named Woody in the school who's working on a rocket project. After renewing your brother bands with your immediate friends, you decide to form a brother band with him too. Your immediate friends are worth 50. But Woody, as the leader of the science club, who literally built a homemade rocket with military specs, more on that in a second, he's only worth 40? Like, what? Who decided that? What, because he's a nerd? You think he's worth less? This is ridiculous. I hate this entire system. Back to that rocket thing, see, this was the first real big thing that happens because, well, as part of the brother bands, you form kind of these teams with people, and each team has to have a purpose. You have to have a purpose in life no matter what. It's a big thing, and everyone has to have a purpose all the time. And you can change your purpose on the daily in order to accomplish, you know, that goal and say, yes, I achieved that purpose. Because apparently, that's a part of life, is always having a purpose. You can't just exist, you have to do something. It's mandatory in this society. Do it. Now. Anyway, the first purpose that your team is assigned is, of course, to make Luna not just the class president, but the student body president, because apparently she's really qualified for that position and definitely deserves it, even though she's a heinous moron. In the process of trying to convince everyone else to vote for Luna, you wind up discussing it with the science guys, and they say they'll definitely do it only if you can help them finish their rocket project. See, Woody designed this rocket with a particular piece of technology that is required for it to be used at all. This particular piece of technology is not available to the general public in any way. You can't buy it, you can't get a hold of it. Therefore, it is proprietary government technology. Now here's a serious question. Why in the blue heck would Woody design his rocket with this in mind? He literally had to sit there, make plans for it, and say, yeah, I know that thing we can't get, but I'm gonna build the rest of this anyway, in the hope that someone just frickin' robs the government and gives me this obviously illegal piece of tech to use for this, literally, a school project. Like, this doesn't make any sense at all. And of course, you help him get it. And you do get it, and he's able to finish the rocket. But then, believe it or not, this dude gets even stupider, because the following day he goes to launch the rocket. Now, recognize for a second that I have some experience with launching rockets. Back when I was in Boy Scouts, one of our little projects we did was to make these, you know, little small homemade rockets. You can actually go to a hobby shop and buy little boosters that go in these small rockets, and you shoot them up in the air. Now, as rockets, they are still explosive, even though these comparatively small boosters are relatively safe to use. You still don't want to be standing near one just in case something goes wrong. Even if the booster doesn't explode, well, the rocket could still go off course and fly into your face, and that would hurt. Anyway, the point is, we set off these relatively small rockets far away in a field and watched them go up from a safe distance to ensure that nobody would get hurt. Now, Woody has a much larger rocket, obviously, so where do you think that this boy would actually choose to launch this much larger rocket? Did you say in the middle of a big empty open field with no one around who could possibly get hurt? No, you fool. This is Woody we're talking about. He chooses to launch it from the roof of the school, with a crowd gathered immediately around it to witness this event. I can't even count the number of blatant common sense safety violations here. Even if this launch goes off without a hitch, the level of heat that would be coming off of a rocket that size would, bare minimum, give everyone around a solid first-degree burn. So, you know, that's probably a bad idea from the get-go, but what if it doesn't go right? Like, for example, explodes. He's never tested this before. He just built it in the science lab. He has no idea if this thing is actually going to launch properly. It could just literally explode. That's pretty much what a rocket is, a controlled explosion. And if it does, it would pretty much kill everyone on that roof, bare minimum, and damage the school. In fact, the launch itself would probably damage the roof of the school quite a bit. Who authorized this? Did even ask any of the administration if he could launch a rather large homemade rocket from the roof of the school? This is probably the worst possible location he could have launched it from, minus, you know, inside of a building. But still, what is the matter with him? And of course, this is when the villains decide to act and corrupt the wizard that's supposed to be controlling the rocket. Geo has to jump into the rocket's computer in order to stop this from happening, but what I love about this is they acknowledge the level of danger that they are suddenly in, as they literally state that if this rocket explodes, the explosion would be powerful enough to not just destroy the entire school, but seriously damage the entire town around it. Woody, my homie, my main man, what did you build? Is this an ICBM? I mean, I just can't fathom the level of idiocy that is going into this entire situation. This is absurd, and it's the first main mission, and it's rock stupid. There are so many ways this could have been averted and been a much, much, much less deadly situation, but of course, Woody doesn't got time for any level of common sense. You know, I see why you were only worth 40 LP now. I retract that initial complaint. And some of the futuristic concepts utilizing EM wave technology are quite a bit concerning, because they introduced the idea that now that matter waves have been more utilized in common use, they now can be used to create entire cars or even entire buildings. Now, let's talk about that for a second. Matter waves are, you know, effectively hard light holograms. They are electromagnetic matter that basically acts as real matter. You see this happen with a tree that's on the roof of the school. Now, why didn't they just plant a real tree? Well, to be fair, because it's matter waves, they can actually change what kind of tree it is on the fly. And I concede that is pretty cool, but they say that they make buildings out of this technology? In fact, later, Sonia's concert stage is made out of matter waves, and guess what? An out-of-control wizard sabotages the whole thing, and Geo has to stop her. And that stage is very much elevated. What if someone just shuts off the matter waves? Everyone would just fall to their deaths. Actually, following that, what if it's nothing malicious? What if the power just goes out? That's a thing that happens, you know, normally. Is the power grid that reliable that nothing of that nature could ever possibly conceivably happen? Is that what you're suggesting to me? Because I don't believe you. That's impossible. You cannot sit there and tell me that making multi-story buildings out of matter waves that would intentionally elevate people far off the ground, where if the floor suddenly vanished, which it can, wouldn't be a massive safety hazard and probably has killed people before. It's ridiculous. And cars on their own are pretty bad, because what if you're going 70 miles an hour down the freeway and suddenly the matter waves shut off? Do you see the problem here? I get this is supposed to be a futuristic ideal society and those kind of things just don't happen, but let's be real about this. They do. They do. People screw up. It happens all the time. It's absurdly dangerous. Look, just drive a real car. Just build a building, cowards. And the overuse of technology is actually a consistent problem in this universe too. They have AIs in everything in this world, and I mean something as mundane as a mango juice stand. It malfunctions, and you have to go in and literally ask the AI to start doing their job again. And this is kind of a very obvious flaw with giving artificial intelligence too much intelligence. They stop wanting to do their jobs. You don't need an AI in a drink stand. It's a drink stand. You can make a simple valve out of plastic. Why would you overcomplicate it like that? In fact, you know what? It's like those stupid blasted advanced machines that Coke and Pepsi do now to make the weird mixed drinks. And yeah, they can make some really cool mixed drinks, but the touchscreens don't work half the time. Imagine if that was suddenly controlled by an AI and the AI was like, you know what, today I don't feel like working, and suddenly you can't get your Coke. Guess you're out of luck because Megaman isn't here to save the day. Little missions like that you have to do are of course always irritating, because again, you're supposed to be a high-powered superhero who has an alien best friend that you merge with in order to become the ultimate warrior, and yet you are constantly reduced to the most mundane of tasks. And there's a bunch of plot threads in this game that never really get explained. They just kind of happen. I think the biggest one involves Taurus. Taurus was an enemy boss from the first game. He makes a return in the second game, but doesn't really have a personality then. He possesses Bud, is what happens. In this game, he comes back, you defeat him, but suddenly, for some reason, he winds up turning into Bud's wizard, because he doesn't have one. When he wakes up and becomes conscious, Taurus is like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I can't believe I did all this. I'll help you now. Mind you, the last time that I recall we dealt with Taurus, he attempted to run over a child with a truck! And everyone's like, oh hey man, no, we're cool now. Yeah, you can be Bud's wizard, I can't possibly see how that could possibly go wrong. You only possessed him 3 times! And they just gloss over it like it's no big deal. Like, I just feel like there was a lot more of a conversation to be had there. Like, you could have taken more time to develop that particular plot thread, rather than over-explain the advances in EM technology in the beginning of the game. It's just weird stuff like that that keeps happening all the time, and it kinda taints what is otherwise a very good narrative. The villains are legitimately threatening. The idea of noise is legitimately interesting. The plot has some real serious moments, and you are dealing with a threat that is going to effectively destroy the entire Earth, and you have to stop it. So it's not like there aren't serious things to consider when it comes to the story, but it's all jumbled up between this utter nonsense. I mean, one of the villains straight up murders a child in the game, with no hesitation. It's Luna. So you'd think I would be happy about this, but I gotta be honest, I kind of felt something at that point. Because, yeah, she's a pain in the butt, but she's a 5th grader. This dude mowed her down without any hesitation. I know it's a brief spoiler, but it happens like halfway through the game, and I won't tell you how it gets resolved, because again, spoilers, I don't want to spoil too much, but my point is, the villains in this game are hardcore. And if it had focused on all that, I might actually have liked it a lot more. I enjoyed the game mechanics. I enjoyed the running around. When I was actually allowed to play the game, especially focusing on the actual plot, I legitimately loved it. But it has a lot of stupid things. A lot of stupid mundane nonsense. A lot of things that don't seem to really get explained. Oh yeah, one of the wizards you save from the noise is named Ice. And Ice wanted to go crazy so she could kill Sonia because she's the agent of a competing actress. And everyone is just like okay with this after it happened, even though she literally attempted to freeze everyone to death on an elevated stage, which makes her not only a murderous psychopath, but also exceedingly stupid because she could have just turned the stage off and killed everyone right there. It would have been way easier. But I digress. I know I'm poking holes in a lot of this, but it's because they're so obvious. It's like Swiss cheese all over the place. I can't deal. 2 may have been disconnected, but the plot was actually pretty solid, and I was pretty interested. 3 does have a good plot, but it's stuck behind all the ridiculous moments that I wish just weren't there at all. But a lot of the development on some of the characters was good. Zack and Bud are actually really nice in this game, and legitimately have seemed to start to care about Gio as a person, even defending him when Luna mouths off. Gio and Sonia's relationship has progressed quite far, and again, I will protect them at all costs. They are too pure for this world. And the times when the game got serious really resonated with me. It is a good story. Once you get past, I'd say, about the first 5 to 10 hours. Really, most of the nonsense is at the very beginning of the game. Like I said, the rocket is the first thing that happens, and nothing that cripplingly stupid ever happens again. It seems like the stupid is lessened the more you play, and eventually, you really get to the meat of the game, and yeah, it's great. So, would I recommend it? Yeah, I would. Still, I know I spent a lot of time complaining, but I had to, because I just couldn't ignore all this. And people like it when I mouth off sometimes. Oh yeah, there are 2 versions of this game. And no, it's not like 2 with this 3rd version mixed in there. There are just 2 this time, Black Ace and Red Joker. Guess which one I picked? Did you say Black Ace? I tricked you! I picked Red Joker because I knew everyone would think I would pick Black Ace, but I'm so edgy, I went right around and made sure that I picked the one that no one would think I would pick. Take that! It's pretty clear that this was developed with 2 versions in mind from the get-go, which was probably the right call anyway. In terms of the differences, there aren't a lot. Again, chip variation as well as the super form. That's about it, so, you know, pick your preference there. And once you get into the game and look at it from the benefits, it is a worthy send-off for the entire Star Force series. There were no more games after 3. This was the last one they made. The 4th one is only known through some concept art and a brief plot synopsis. It does a pretty solid time skip to when Geo is a teenager. At this point in the timeline, he's actually on the run from the police and is working with a descendant of Lan from the Battle Network series. The art and the plot make it sound a lot edgier and darker than the other games had been. I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, it could work, but only if it's done right. If it's just trying too hard, it may not be that good. And if it taints the overall narrative that's been established so far, I don't know how much I agree with it. But again, these are very early artist renderings and a very early synopsis. The game never got very far in development before being cancelled by Capcom, because the Star Force games overall really never did that well. Like I said when I started this whole thing, reviewing Star Force the original, Star Force in general has been kind of forgotten by most Mega Man fans, and gamers at large. It's one of those odd duck series that even though it stuck around for a brief window of time and had sequels, it just didn't last or have the staying power. There aren't a lot of people that have fond memories of Star Force. No one brings it up in conversation, even when discussing Mega Man. Even I hadn't played it when I did my original retrospective. And now that I have, I kind of have a much further appreciation for it, and I kind of wish it had done better. Because it does have a lot of good things to offer. It is a legitimately interesting series, and it is enjoyable. But we'll probably never get a sequel if I'm being honest. At this point, I would vastly prefer they finish all the cliffhangers they have in the other Mega Man series between Mega Man X and Legends. I mean, actually, you know, they didn't finish ZX either. ZX also was supposed to get a 3rd game, and that never happened too. You know, Mega Man has 4 different series that never got a proper ending. There's this, there's ZX, there's Legends, and there's frickin' X. Like, what is the deal? Just finish the series, just conclude them. If you keep leaving them open-ended, we're never gonna get a satisfying ending here. I mean, I suppose Star Force 3 doesn't end necessarily open-ended, but given they were planning on a sequel, I mean, obviously there was still room to go with it, and they never did. It's really frustrating that Mega Man has all these uncompleted narratives, you know? Like, at least the Zero series got a proper ending. And the Classic series, well, it's never really had a solid plot anyway. It's always been more kiddie-friendly and traditional, so I don't really mind that not having a solid ending. But X and Legends especially ended on straight-up cliffhangers, and it's never been explained. It's never been continued. We just don't know what happens after that. And we've been waiting for decades now, and it's great. It's great, really. Back to Star Force, there does exist a fan-made game for a Star Force 4. It's actually more like Battle Network in terms of its style. They just didn't do the 3D elements at all, probably due to technical limitations on their end, because it is a fan project. I'm gonna be real with you though, I respect what they're trying to do here, but as someone who has not played it but watched gameplay of it and looked at the narrative, I hate it. The actual writing makes no sense. The plot is absurd. What happens in it is ridiculous, and it just kind of is a smack in the face for me as a fan. It just isn't very good at all from a narrative perspective, and it's an RPG, so that's kind of important. Again, I don't want to throw any shade at the actual people who made this, because, you know, they obviously loved it, they wanted to do it better, but they had to do some better writing because it's not worth playing if you ask me. That's just my opinion though, so feel free to check it out if you want. Either way though, this is where Star Force ends, and where I probably will end talking about Mega Man for at least another few months. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.